I am 63 years old the night I jump. That is not a confession. I have nothing left to confess to. The chip in my wrist will write its own report the moment my body stops moving, and the Vohra overseers will read it before the snow on the courtyard tiles has finished taking the shape of me. They will log the time. They will log the angle. They will not understand a single thing about why. That is the part I want to tell you, not the falling, the why. So let me walk it backwards, the way it actually lived in my head those last hours, because that is the only honest way I know how to do it. A man does not die in a straight line. He dies the way he lived, in pieces, out of order, with the wrong faces showing up in the wrong rooms. I have been carrying these rooms in my head for 54 years. I have been carrying them in the order they came to me, which is not the order they happened. The mind does not file these things by date. The mind files them by weight. So let me put them down by weight. The apartment is on the 42nd floor of a residential stack the Vohra rebuilt 20 years ago after the third quarantine. They tore down the old block because the old block had corners they could not see into. The new block has no corners. Every wall is curved. Every door reports. Every window opens exactly 15 centimeters, which is enough to let in the cold and not enough to let out a grown man. Unless that grown man is willing to break the frame, which I am, because I have brought a salvage bar up from the construction yard for exactly this purpose. The bar is cold. My hands are colder. Outside, snow is coming down sideways across the towers in the kind of slow gray curtain that the city does not get naturally anymore. The Vohra modulate the weather. They like it cold. Their bodies prefer it. Ours do not, but no one asked us. Below me there is a courtyard. Below the courtyard there is concrete. Below the concrete there is more concrete, and below that there is the older city, the one I grew up in, the one they paved. I do not jump yet. First I want to tell you about her. Her name was Ara. I'm going to tell you that now because if I wait until the right part of the story you will be too far gone to care, and she deserves better than that. She came up from the warm world 3 months ago on a labor contract that nobody intended to honor. She had hair the color of wet straw and a chipped front tooth from something she would not explain, and a way of laughing that was too loud for the room she was in, every room she was ever in, which I think is what got her killed in the end. The Vohra do not like volume, they did not authorize. I met her in a service unit on the 18th tier where men my age go to remember that they used to be men. The room was 4 meters by 3, painted the soft compliance gray that all service units have been painted since the second pandemic, with a window the size of a hand, and a bed that the management replaced every 6 months because the springs could not survive the trade. There was a strip of light under the door from the corridor. There was the smell of the disinfectant they use on the sheets, which is a smell I have associated with cheap relief and old men for 30 years. She was not what I paid for. She was what was there. I had walked into the desk on the 18th tier with my pension card and asked for the cheapest woman they had, and the man behind the glass had looked at me with the small contempt that all the desk men have for the men who come up the 18th tier on a winter night with a pension card, and he had pointed me at the door of room 9. She opened it before I knocked. That was the first thing. She had heard me coming down the corridor, which meant she was listening, which meant she was awake, which meant she had not slept yet that night. She was 26, maybe 27. She was wearing a thin gray robe that had been washed too many times and a chain around her neck with a small brass bell on it, the kind of bell a cat wears. When she saw my face, she did not smile the way the women on the 18th tier are trained to smile. She said, "You look tired, old man. Come in." I went in. When I scanned her wrist out of professional habit, old habits, old hands, the chip came back blank, not encrypted, not redacted, blank, as if she had not been born, as if no overseer had ever looked at her and decided what she was for. I sat down on the edge of that narrow bed and I cried, and I had not cried in 26 years. She did not ask why. She put a hand on the back of my neck and she said, in the broken trade tongue that all the contract workers use, "You are a sad man." And I said yes. And she said, "Do you want to be less sad for 1 hour?" And I said no, I want to be less sad for the rest of my life, and we both knew that was not on the menu, but she laughed anyway, that too loud laugh, and the laugh was the closest thing I had heard to a human sound in a year. We did not do what I had paid for. We sat on the narrow bed in the gray room, and she made me tea on a small heating coil that the management did not know she had, and the tea was real tea, not the Vohra-licensed concentrate, real leaves from somewhere in the warm world she would not name. And she told me she had been on the 18th tier for 9 weeks, and before that she had been in a vat-clean facility in the south, and before that she had been on a ship that came up from a port whose name she did not say. She did not ask about me. She had been trained, I think, not to ask. But when I told her my name was Dongling, she said it back to me carefully, like a word in a language she was learning, and she touched the chipped front tooth with her tongue, and she said, "That is a good name. A father gave you that name." I said, "My mother gave me that name." She said she loved you then. I said she left when I was 3. She put down her tea. She looked at me with the kind of attention I had not been given by another human being in a long time. She said, "You are sure she left?" I said yes. She said, "Men are always sure. That is the trouble with men." Then she laughed again, that loud surprised laugh that did not belong on the 18th tier, that did not belong in any Vohra-managed room. And I knew, the way you know a thing in the bones of your wrists, that I was going to do something terrible because of her, and that the terrible thing was going to be the only good thing I had done in 31 years. I am telling you this so you understand. When I went up the stairs of the residential stack with the salvage bar wrapped in a coat, I was not going up there for myself. I had stopped being for myself a long time ago. I was going up there for the man on the 42nd floor. His name was Shijai Wen. He had been my watch commander when I was young and an enforcement man, and he was now a Vohra-confirmed Minister of Compliance, which is the title they give to the humans they trust to do the things they themselves find distasteful. He had been sleeping with my wife for 31 years. He had been the one who put the marked credits in my locker the morning they pulled my badge. He had laughed when they took me out the back door of the station. He had said, "Do not worry, brother, I will look after you, Fang, for you while you are away." And the laugh that came out of him then was not a Vohra laugh. It was a human one, and that was worse. He was on the 42nd floor because the Vohra had given him a compliance suite with a real window and a real view, and because tonight he was dying. I had put 8 units of stripped neuroquench into his transfusion line 90 minutes earlier, while wearing a stolen medic's tunic and the face of a man who had nothing left to lose. The tunic I had taken off a hook in a staff changing room at the River District Clinic 4 days before, on a visit I had logged as a back pain consultation. The neuroquench I had bought a vial at a time over 6 months from a courier who ran the eastern markets, paying in scrip a credit at a time so the chip would not flag the sum. The hospital ward had not stopped me. The chip in my wrist had not flagged me. I had walked in past 3 Vohra guards and 1 human auxiliary, and not one of them had looked at me twice, because at 63 I had become the thing the surveillance grid was built to ignore, an old man, slow, sad, and on a sanctioned errand. I had a clipboard. I had a tunic. I had the careful, tired walk of a hospital lifer 5 hours into a 12-hour shift. The Vohra guards register profile and posture and gait before they register face, and my profile was the profile of a man who belonged. It took me 4 minutes to find his room. It took me 90 seconds to put the 8 units into the slow drip of his transfusion line. He did not wake up. He was already on Vohra-grade sedation because of what I had done to his face earlier that week in the open courtyard of the compliance hall, in front of his wife, who was my wife, in front of his clerks, in front of the chip feed. They had peeled me off him before I could finish. The Vohra compliance office had filed it as a domestic incident, which is the file they use when they cannot decide whether to make a thing public. They had not pressed charges. They had assumed, the way the Vohra always assume, that an old man with a grievance was a closed system. They had not understood that an old man with a grievance, freshly humiliated, openly defeated, is the most open system the city has. That is the first thing the Vohra never learned about us. They built a city that watched everything. They forgot that watching is not the same as seeing. I broke the window frame. The salvage bar bit through the polymer like it had been waiting 50 years to do it. The cold came in. The wind came in. Somewhere below me, on the 18th tier, Ara was probably already dead. They had picked her up that afternoon for unauthorized vocal output, which is what they called the laugh. And somewhere above me, on the 70th floor, my daughter was asleep in a unit I had paid for with the last of my pension. And somewhere across the city my wife was lying next to the cooling body of the man I had just murdered. And somewhere in the bones of the planet the Vohra Hive-Mother was registering, very faintly, that one of her chipped humans was about to do something her models had not predicted. I stepped up onto the ledge. The wind pulled at my coat like a hand. I thought about Big Sister Wang. I thought about the way she had looked at me across the holding cell when I was 15 years old. I thought about the truth she had told me that night, the truth that had ruined everything that came after. And then I let go. You need to understand what this city was, before you understand what I did to it. The Vohra came down in the spring of 24, when I was a boy of 9. They did not arrive in ships, the way our old stories said they would. They arrived in seed pods that fell over 6 continents in one night, soft thumps in the wheat fields and the city parks. And by morning the pods had cracked open and there were Vohra in them. Full grown, vat finished, chitin still tacky from the gestation gel, already speaking to each other in the low subsonic hum that no human ear could parse without augmentation. The first one I ever saw was standing in the middle of the wet market 3 blocks from my mother's apartment, 3 meters tall, segmented like an insect that had decided to wear the rough shape of a person. Its mandibles moved when it spoke. Its eyes did not blink because it did not have eyelids in the way we mean the word. It was eating a fish. It was eating the fish without taking the fish off the ice. It bit the fish in half and the half it did not swallow it returned, very precisely, to the place on the ice where it had taken the fish from, as if the act of returning the uneaten half were a courtesy that the situation required. The fishmonger watched it do this and did not move and did not breathe. I was standing behind the fishmonger. I was 9. I have remembered, my whole life, the way the Vohra returned the uneaten half of the fish to the ice. Not as cruelty, not as theater, but as a kind of administrative tidiness, the same way a clerk straightens a stack of papers before going home for the night. That is what they were. That is what they still are. They are clerks. They are clerks with chitin and antibodies and a Hive-Mother in the deep wet rooms of a planet they have not yet bothered to name, and they have decided to file us, and they are very good at filing. By the time I was 12, every human on the planet had a chip in their wrist. By the time I was 15, the cities had been rezoned, the languages had been compressed into a single trade tongue for ease of administration, and the borders had been redrawn into what the Vohra called compliance sectors. We did not call them anything. There was no point in nomming them. They were the world now. There was no war, really. There had been a war in the first 3 months, but it had been the kind of war you fight when you have rifles, and the other side has cultivated antibodies that turn your lungs into pulp from 40 meters away. It was over before anyone outside the capitals had finished understanding it was happening. I have spoken to old men who were soldiers in those 3 months. They do not talk about it the way old soldiers talk. They talk about it the way men talk about a building collapse. There was a noise, and then there was dust, and then there was a list of the dead, and the list was long, and there was no enemy in the dust to swing at, only the dust itself, which kept getting in their lungs and turning their lungs into something the medics could not save. After that, there was only what the Vohra called accommodation, and what the rest of us called Tuesday. The Vohra were not cruel exactly. Cruelty implies a feeling, and feeling was not something their hive logic had use for. They were efficient. They were patient. They had decided, somewhere in the wet rooms of the Hive-Mother's body, that humans were a resource that could be made tractable through careful pruning of the unruly branches, and so they pruned. They pruned us at the level of language. They pruned us at the level of music. They pruned us at the level of family. If your records showed too much disorder, your children went to the dormitories, and if you complained about the dormitories, your records grew worse. By the time I was a young man, no one I knew under the age of 40 could remember what their grandparents' songs had sounded like, because the songs had been pruned gently over 30 years, the way you prune a tree that you do not want to kill, only quiet. The pruning was the worst of it and the smartest of it. You cannot raise a fist against pruning. There is no battle line. There is only a slow narrowing of the kinds of human you are allowed to be, until one day you look up and the only remaining shape of human in your sector is the shape the Vohra have left room for, and even that shape is shrinking and you have grown up inside the shrinking and you do not know that the shape used to be bigger. That is how you take a planet. Not with rifles, with shears. I joined enforcement at 22. I'm not going to pretend it was because I was a good man. I joined because enforcement got a real apartment and a meat ration and a chip that did not throttle your sleep cycle. I joined because my mother had walked out the door of our unit when I was 3 years old and not come back, and enforcement was the closest thing the Vohra offered to a family. I joined because the alternative was the labor pools, and the labor pools were where the Vohra's medical division did the work they did not call experiments. Men I knew from my block had gone into the labor pools at 18 and come back at 22 with the wrong number of fingers and a way of looking at children that I did not want to acquire. Enforcement was the door out of the labor pools. I went through the door. That is the kind of bargain you make when you are young in a world like this. You sell yourself to the people pruning the tree because at least, that way, you get to hold the shears. I am going to tell you about the middle of my life now. The summer I was 28. The summer Ara, the first one, the real one, came into the station with shoplifter cuffs on her thin wrists and changed everything I thought I was. She was French. There were still a few of those around then. Her papers were halfway legitimate. She had come up on a music tutor visa that the Vohra had since suspended, and she had been caught lifting rejuvenation gel from a pharmacy in the River District, which was a misdemeanor under human code and a flogging class offense under Vohra code, depending on who logged the report. I was the one who logged it. I logged it human. I do not know why I did. I had not done a kindness for a stranger in 5 years. Maybe it was her hair. Maybe it was the way she laughed when I read her the charge, that loud, surprised laugh that did not belong in a precinct that ran on whispers. I drove her home in a patrol skimmer. I should not have. Yu Fang and I had been married 4 years and the cracks were already showing, the way they show in a building that was put up too fast on bad foundations. My wife was sleeping with my watch commander. I had not yet found the evidence, but I had found the silence, and the silence was worse than evidence, because silence you cannot file a report on. She had stopped asking me about my day. She had stopped leaving the salt out on the counter when she made dinner, which had been a small thing between us in the first year, a marriage joke about my taste, and the day the salt stopped appearing on the counter was the day I knew, in the part of me that does not lie, that my marriage was over. I just did not have the language for it yet. Ara lived in a sublet above a noodle shop where the rent was paid in cash because cash still existed for foreigners then, just barely. She invited me up. I went up. I am not going to lie about what happened next, and I am not going to dress it up. We were 2 lonely animals in a city that had been taught not to feel, and for one night we forgot the lesson. We did not sleep. We sat on the floor of her sublet with a bottle of warm world wine she had been hiding for a celebration that had never come, and she told me about her sister who had stayed behind in a French sector, and who was probably dead now, because the second pandemic had taken the French sectors hardest. And I told her about my mother walking out the door when I was 3, and Ara listened in the way a person listens who has been on the wrong end of leaving herself. When the sun came up, she asked me if I would come back the next night. I said yes. She said, "You will not." I said, "I will." She said, "Men say that." And I said, "I am not men, I am a man, and you will see." In the morning, I drove back to the precinct, and Jai-wen was waiting for me in the locker room with 2 Vohra auxiliaries and a smile like a knife wound. There were marked credits in my locker, 200,000 of them in the soft flex chips that the Vohra used for off-book settlements. I had never seen them before in my life. I knew the moment I saw them who had put them there. I knew the moment I saw Jai-Wen's smile why. He had found out about my wife and me finding out about him. The math of his life only worked if I disappeared, so I was going to disappear. 6 months, the deputy chief said. 6 months in the work camps at the edge of the compliance sector, where the Vohra ran experiments on chipped humans that no one would call experiments because the records did not use that word. 6 months, and after 6 months I would come back and my badge would be gone, and my wife would still be there, and Jai-Wen would still be her watch commander, and the world would go on the way the world goes on. I asked to make 1 call. They gave me 1 call. I tried Aura. The connection said the subscriber's chip had been deauthorized. I tried again, same message. I tried a 3rd time, knowing it would be a 3rd time, and the auxiliaries took the handset out of my hand. Jai-Wen leaned in and said, in a voice low enough that the chip might not catch it, "I told you I would look after your wife while you were away. Be a good boy. Do your time. Come back to a normal family." I broke his nose in the locker room. They added an assault charge. The 6 months became 18. The work camp was at the edge of the compliance sector, in a valley the Vohra had cleared of trees for what they called atmospheric study. They put us in long, low barracks, and they took our chips out of our wrists and put new chips into our shoulders that throttled our sleep cycles to 90 minutes at a time. They did not work us very hard. They did not need to. The throttle did the work. After 3 weeks of 90-minute sleep cycles, a man will tell you anything. After 8 weeks, he will agree to anything. After 18 months, he will come out of the valley with a face he does not recognize in the mirror and a willingness to do whatever the Vohra need him to do in order to never go back. That was the design. That was the pruning at scale. They were not making us into prisoners. They were making us into auxiliaries. I did not break. I came close. I am not going to claim more than that. There was a night in the 7th month when I sat on the floor of the barracks with my belt in my hands, and I thought about a particular ceiling beam for a long time, and the only thing that stopped me in the end was that I could not get the picture of Aura's chipped front tooth out of my head. Not the chip, the tooth, the small imperfection in a face that had been kind to me without asking why. And I decided, on the floor of that barracks in the 7th month, that I would not give Jai-Wen the gift of a closed file. I would come back. I would do my time. I would come back and I would be the most boring auxiliary in the compliance sector for 30 years. And one day, when he was old and confident and surrounded by his Vohra friends, I would put 8 units of stripped neuroquench into his transfusion line, and I would do it on my schedule, not his. I put the belt back in the loops. I slept my 90 minutes. The next morning the throttle started again, and I started counting days. When I came back, 18 months later, Aura's name had been scrubbed from every database I had clearance for. The noodle shop had been pulled down for a Vohra plaza. Yu Fang was pregnant and the dates did not work, and I knew the dates did not work, and I did not say anything because the only thing worse than knowing was making her admit that I knew. Our daughter was born in the winter. I held her in the hospital and she opened her eyes and she looked at me, and I decided then and there that I was going to be a normal father in a normal family, because that was the only revenge against Jai-Wen and the Vohra and the whole sick architecture of the city that was still available to me. I would deny them my unhappiness. I would deny them the wreck they had built. I did that for 31 years. I want a man somewhere to know that. I did it for 31 years and it nearly killed me every day. And the only reason it did not kill me was that my daughter laughed sometimes the way Aura had laughed, that loud surprised laugh. And I do not know where she got it because Yu Fang did not laugh that way, and I had not laughed that way in decades. But my daughter did, and I lived for those laughs the way some men live for a god. Then in my 63rd year, she moved off-world on a frontier contract and the laughs stopped, and Yu Fang took up with Jiwen openly because there was no longer a daughter to perform a normal family for, and I went down to the 18th tier and met a girl whose chip read blank, and her hair was the color of wet straw, and she had a chipped front tooth, and she laughed too loud for the room. I want to be careful here. I am not saying my aura came back. I am not a fool. The Vohra had been refining their second skin mimics for 40 years, and the Hive-Mother's vats could spin a body to any specification a client requested if the client had the credits. Someone Jiwen, almost certainly, or one of the compliance office's grinning little jackals, had requisitioned a mimic to my old file's parameters and sent her down to the 18th tier knowing where I went on the nights I could not sleep. It was an old trick. It was meant to break me. It was meant to make me put the salvage bar through my own throat in front of a registered witness so they could close the file on the corrupt enforcement man who had finally finished the job 31 years late. What they did not understand, what they could not understand because their hive logic processed humans the way a man processes ants, is that I did not care whether she was Aura or a mimic of Aura or a stranger wearing Aura's face for a fee. I had not been in love with a face for 31 years. I had been in love with the loud laugh, and the loud laugh was real. The chipped tooth was real. The hand on the back of my neck was real. Whoever was inside that body had decided, in the small, slow way of a person who has not been given many chances, to be kind to a stranger. That is a human thing. That is the most human thing. When the compliance auxiliaries came for her that afternoon, for the unauthorized vocal output, I was 3 blocks away buying a coil of stripped neuroquench off a man who had no business selling it. I heard the sirens. I did not turn around. I knew what they were for. I had been enforcement once. I knew the sound of my own old job picking up a girl whose chip read blank. I could not save her. I did not even try. That is on me, and I will own it on the way down. But I could do the other thing. I could go up to the hospital with 8 units of neuroquench in my coat pocket and a stolen medic's tunic in a bag, and I could put the quench into Jiwen's transfusion line, slow and steady, while pretending to check a chart. I could walk back out past the same 3 Vohra and 1 auxiliary who had not seen me come in. I could go home and find my wife in the apartment we had shared for 31 years, and I could tell her, finally, in plain language, what I had known since the year our daughter was born, and I could watch her face for the half-second of recognition before I did what I did. I am not going to describe that part. A 65-year-old viewer of A Quiet Evening does not need the details. It was over quickly. I did not enjoy it. I did not hate it either. That is what 31 years of pruning does to a man. Then I went up to the 42nd floor with the salvage bar. I told you I would tell you about the night I met Big Sister Wang. The 3rd night, the one that explains the rest. I was 15 years old. I had stolen a hover scooter from a Vohra licensed delivery yard, not because I needed it, but because there was a girl I wanted to impress, and at 15, that is sufficient reason for any catastrophe. The auxiliaries caught me within the hour. They put me in a holding cell at the old precinct on Minsheng Boulevard, the one with the green tile that the Vohra eventually pulled down, and they told me my case would be heard at dawn. The cell was not empty. There was a woman in it. Mid-40s, maybe older. It was hard to tell in that light. She wore a long coat that no working woman could afford, and she sat on the bench with the kind of stillness that I had only ever seen in old soldiers and in the very rich. The auxiliaries had been careful with her. They had not even cuffed her. When they shut the cell door behind me, one of them said, "Ma'am, your counsel will be here in 2 hours," and she nodded the way a queen nods at a footman, and the auxiliary backed out of the room. I sat down on the far end of the bench. I tried not to look at her. She looked at me anyway. She said, "You stole a scooter." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Why?" I said, "For a girl." She laughed. It was a low laugh, dry as a coin dropped on concrete. She said, "That is the only honest reason a boy ever does anything. What is the girl's name?" I told her the girl's name. I'm not going to put it down here because the girl is dead now, has been dead for 48 years, died in the second compliance pandemic when I was a young enforcement man and could not get the medicine to her in time. But I told it to Big Sister Wang in that holding cell. And Big Sister Wang looked at me for a long time. Long enough that I started to be afraid of her, because by then I had figured out who she was. Every kid in the River District knew who Big Sister Wang was. She was the one human in the compliance sector that the Vohra had never been able to chip. She had paid a Hive-Mother surgeon in unmarked off-world credits to put a dummy chip in her wrist while keeping her actual brain stem uninterfaced. And she ran every gray market operation east of the river with that head start. And the Vohra knew, and they did not move on her, because she paid them in something the Hive-Mother wanted more than control, and no one knew what it was. She was the most dangerous person in the city. She was sitting on a holding bench with a 15-year-old scooter thief because her counsel was on the way and because, I would learn later, she had asked the auxiliaries to put her in a cell with a boy on intake. She had asked them by name. She said, "What is your mother's name?" I said, "I do not have one. She left when I was 3. She said, "What was her name?" I told her. My mother's name was Wang Meiling. I had not said it aloud in 12 years. The shape of it in my mouth felt wrong, like a tool I had not held since childhood. The cell got very quiet for a moment that was probably only 1 second long and felt to me like an hour. Big Sister Wang sat very still on the bench. She did not move for a long time. The light from the corridor cut across her face, and her face was a face I had not let myself look at in any photograph in 12 years, because there were no photographs, because there had been a small fire when I was 4 years old. In the unit I shared with my grandmother, and the grandmother had said the fire was an accident, and the photographs were gone, all of them, every one. I had grown up thinking my mother had left me because I was the kind of child a woman leaves. I had grown up thinking that was the central fact about me. It was the floor of my life. Everything I built on it. Big Sister Wang said, "I am going to tell you something now, and I want you to listen." I listened. She said, "I left because the Vohra told me they would put your father in a wet room if I did not. They needed a runner who could move off-world credits through the warm-world ports, and I was the one who could do it, and they made it a choice between you and him, and I made the wrong choice, and I have lived with it for 12 years. I came back twice. The first time your grandmother would not let me see you. The second time you were 6 and you were playing in the courtyard and you were laughing, and I watched you laugh for an hour and then I left again, because I knew if I spoke to you I would take you, and if I took you the Vohra would find us both inside a week. I have not laughed since that day. I want you to know that. I do not deserve to." I sat on the bench and I did not say anything. There was nothing to say. There is a kind of news that arrives in a person and rearranges the furniture of the inside of them, and there is nothing to say while the furniture is moving. You wait until it stops moving. Then you find out what room you are in. She said, "Your father died in a wet room anyway. 6 months after I went to the ports. They had no more use for him once they had me. I have known this for 11 years. I am telling you because no one is ever going to tell you, and you have a right to know, and I have not earned the right to keep it from you any longer." I said, "Then you should have come back." She said, "I know." I said, "Why are you telling me now?" She said, "Because I am tired. Because tomorrow morning a thing is going to happen that I have been arranging for 2 years, and after that thing happens, I will not have any more chances to tell you. And because you are sitting in a cell at 15 with a stolen scooter and a girl's name on your tongue, and you are exactly the boy I was afraid you would grow up to be. And I want you to hear, one time from the only person who has the standing to say it, that you are not the kind of child a woman leaves. You are the kind of child a woman is forced from. There is a difference. You will spend the rest of your life believing it is the same thing. I am asking you one time to consider the possibility that it is not. I did not answer her. I could not. I sat on the bench and I looked at the green tile floor and I counted the cracks in it, and the cracks were a number I never finished counting because the cracks went under the bench and I could not see the rest of them. She said, "Your counsel is not coming. I asked them to log you out at dawn with no charge. You will go home tonight. You will not see me again. I am not going to ask you to forgive me. I am going to ask you to remember that I was real, that I existed, that when I left it was a choice and the choice was wrong, but it was a choice and not the absence of one. Do you understand the difference?" I said, "I do not know." She said, "You will." Then her counsel came. He was a Vohra liaison in a soft suit, and he did not look at me. He took her out of the cell. She did not look at me either when she stood up. I watched her walk down the corridor in her long coat, and I thought, that is the most human person I have ever seen, and I did not know yet what I meant by that. They logged me out at dawn. There was no charge. I never saw her again in life. 8 years later, when I was an enforcement cadet, I read a report that crossed my desk by accident. Big Sister Wang had been found in a service alley behind a Vohra-compliant station. The report said suicide. The report said she had jumped from the roof of the station. The report said her chip had registered no instruction, no command, no compulsion. She had simply walked up the stairs and out onto the roof and stepped off on her own off schedule, the way no chipped human was supposed to be able to do. The Vohra had flagged the file. The Hive-Mother herself, according to the file's metadata, had taken an interest. The metadata noted, in the precise dry language of Hive analysis, that the subject's behavior could not be modeled, and that further study was required. I read the report twice, then a third time. There was a note in the secondary log, in a clerk's hand, that the subject had been observed in the 24 hours preceding the event making a series of small administrative arrangements, transferring assets to a registered minor, settling outstanding accounts with 2 warm-world brokers, leaving a sealed package at a compliance station post office with instructions for it to be delivered at the recipient's 25th birthday. The recipient was me. I was 23. I had 2 more years before the package would be sent. I read that report at my cadet desk, and I did not cry. I was not capable of crying yet. I was 23, but I understood, for the first time, what she had been trying to tell me in the holding cell. She had not been telling me about herself. She had been telling me about us, about what we were, about the one thing the Vohra had never figured out how to prune because they could not see it, because it did not look like anything in their Hive models. The capacity of a human being to walk up a set of stairs and out onto a roof, off schedule, and step off on their own, for a reason that the watchers could not name. The package arrived 2 years later on my 25th birthday. I was a new enforcement officer by then. It contained a single photograph, faded at the edges, taken before the Vohra came down. A woman in her 20s holding a small boy on her hip. The boy was laughing. The woman was laughing. They were both laughing the same loud, surprised laugh. The laugh I would not hear again for 26 years, until a girl with a chipped front tooth made me a cup of real tea on a heating coil in a serviced room on the 18th tier. I burned the photograph the night it arrived. I burned it because I knew that if the Vohra ever found it in my possession, they would understand more about me than I wanted any overseer to understand. I burned it and I memorized it, and I have carried the memorized version of it in my head for 38 years. It is not a weapon. It is not a strategy. It is not a war. It is just the thing we have that they do not, and they cannot take it from us, no matter how many sectors they redraw, no matter how many songs they prune, no matter how many girls with loud laughs they pick up in the afternoon. We have the off-schedule step. They do not. I have carried that knowledge for 48 years, the way a soldier carries a round he has been saving for a particular door. Tonight is the door. I am on the ledge now. The snow is sideways. Below me the courtyard is empty because the Vohra cleared it for a maintenance pass an hour ago, and the maintenance pass will not come for another 4 minutes. I have timed this. I was enforcement for 21 years before they pulled my badge. I know how the patrol cycles move. Jiwen is cooling in his compliance suite 3 windows over. Yu Fang is cooling in our apartment. The mimic with Ara's face is in a holding cell on the 18th tier, and I cannot save her, but I have transferred the last of my pension to her file under a name that the auxiliaries will not be able to unwind for at least a month, and a month is enough time for her to slip down to the Warmworld port if she has the laugh in her that I think she has, the real laugh, the one I gave her credits for. My daughter is on a frontier station, asleep in a bunk under a different sun. Her file lists me as deceased of natural causes as of this morning. I bribed the registry clerk last week with the second to last of my pension. By the time the Vohra reconcile the timestamps, it will be too late to chase her down. She will have a clean inheritance. She will not know what I did tonight. I want it that way. A daughter does not need her father's last act in her head. She needs the laugh. I wrote her a letter 3 weeks ago that she will receive in 6 months when the registry forwards my personal effects to her station address. The letter does not mention Jiwen. It does not mention Yu Fang. It does not mention the 18th tier or the girl with the chipped tooth or the 8 units of neuroquench. It is 1 page long. It tells her 3 things. It tells her that her grandmother was the bravest person who ever lived in this city. It tells her that her laugh, the loud surprised one, came down to her from her grandmother on a line the Vohra never managed to cut. And it tells her in the last paragraph that the most important thing a human being can do in a world like ours is take a step the Watchers did not authorize, for a reason the Watchers cannot name, and that I hope, in a long life under a sun the Vohra have not yet reached, she will find at least 1 chance to take such a step. I did not sign the letter. I did not need to. She will know who it is from. The Hive-Mother is going to read my chip's last data in about 40 seconds. She is going to see a 63-year-old human compliance auxiliary, decorated, broken, predictable, step off a 42nd floor ledge off schedule. After a sequence of events her models did not predict, killing 2 of her senior compliance assets in the process, and leaving her with a daughter she cannot find and a frame-up file she cannot close, because the man who could have closed it is also dead. She is going to flag the file. She is going to take a personal interest. She is going to write, in the precise dry language of Hive analysis, that the subject's behavior cannot be modeled and that further study is required. Other humans, somewhere in the city, are going to read that file someday. They are going to read it the way I read Big Sister Wang's file at my cadet desk 40 years ago. They are going to understand what I am trying to tell them now. I am not telling them how to win. There is no winning. The Vohra are too big and we are too small, and the war was over before any of us were born. I am telling them about the step. The off-schedule step. The thing we have that they do not. The thing the Hive cannot prune because the Hive cannot see it. The thing my mother stepped off a roof to teach me. The thing Ara laughed too loud to remind me of. The thing my daughter is going to carry to a frontier station under a sun the Vohra have not yet reached. It is not much. I know it is not much. A man on a ledge with a salvage bar in his coat, and a wife and a watch commander cooling in 2 apartments and a girl in a holding cell he could not save. That is not the kind of victory anyone writes a song about, even back when we were allowed songs. But it is mine. It is the one thing in 63 years that is mine. The Vohra did not authorize it. The Hive-Mother did not predict it. The chip in my wrist did not sanction it. I am doing it because I decided to do it, and I decided to do it for reasons no overseer can read. And when my body hits the courtyard tiles in about 6 seconds, the only thing the Hive will be able to say with certainty is that an old man stepped off a ledge at a time the models did not allow. That is enough. That is the small hard thing we have, and they do not and never will. The wind takes my coat. The snow takes my face. Somewhere very far away I hear, or think I hear, a loud surprised laugh. Maybe it is the mimic on the 18th tier. Maybe it is my daughter in her bunk under another sun in her sleep. Maybe it is my mother on a different roof, 48 years ago, the one I never got to hear. I step. The 42 floors fall away under me in a long, slow column of light, and the city the Vohra built tilts past my shoulder like a thing that was never as permanent as it pretended to be. And the last thought I have, before the courtyard tiles take the shape of me, is that the chip in my wrist will write its report, and the Hive-Mother will read it, and somewhere in the wet rooms of her great body she will pause, for the briefest possible moment, the way a thing pauses when it is seen, just for an instant. The shape of the one variable it cannot solve. She will not understand. That is the point. That has always been the point. We did not need her to understand. We only needed her to know we were still here, still stepping, still choosing the wrong floor at the wrong time for the wrong reasons. The cold is gone now. The snow is gone. The courtyard is coming up to meet me very fast and very slow, the way things do when the chip is about to stop writing. I think of Aura. I think of my daughter. I think of the woman in the long coat on the holding bench, who told me, when I was 15, that the difference between a choice and the absence of one was the only difference that mattered. I think she was right. I think we were always going to lose the war. I think we lost it the night the seed pods came down in the wheat fields. I think every human in every compliance sector on this planet has known, in the part of themselves the chip does not reach, that we lost it, and that we have been losing it every day for 54 years, and that no amount of small, clever, brave human things is going to give us back the songs, or the borders, or the languages, or the children they took to the dormitories. But losing is not the same as being gone. The Vohra do not know this. The Hive-Mother in all her wet wisdom does not know this. Big Sister Wang knew it. Ara knew it. My daughter, I hope, will know it. You keep stepping. You keep choosing the wrong floor at the wrong time. You keep laughing too loud in rooms that were not built for laughing in. You do it for no reason the watchers can name, and the watchers write it down, and the watchers cannot model it, and somewhere in the long dry future of their patient pruning, the file on you sits open, and a hive analyst pauses, and the pause is the only victory we get, and the pause is enough. The pause is enough. I hit the courtyard. The chip stops writing. The snow keeps coming down sideways across a city that thinks it owns the weather. Somewhere in the wet rooms of her great body, the Hive-Mother of the Vohra, who has presided over the patient and efficient management of this planet for 54 standard years, registers, for the briefest possible moment, the shape of a variable she cannot solve. She flags the file. She takes a personal interest. She writes, in the precise dry language of hive analysis, that the subject's behavior cannot be modeled. She writes that further study is required. And somewhere in the city, an enforcement cadet who is 23 years old, who will live to be 63, who has not yet met the woman in the long coat on the holding bench, who has not yet stolen a scooter or arrested a foreign girl or held a daughter in a hospital ward, sits at a cadet desk and reads the file by accident. He reads it. He does not cry. He is not capable of crying yet. But he understands. He understands what I am trying to tell him, what Big Sister Wang told me, what Ara reminded me of, what my daughter is carrying to a frontier station under a different sun. He understands that there is one thing the hive cannot prune. And he carries it forward. That is all I have to leave him. That is all any of us ever had to leave anyone. A pause in a file, a laugh in a room that was not built for laughing, a step off the wrong floor at the wrong time for the wrong reasons. It is not a war. It is not a weapon. It is just the thing we are. And it is enough. The snow keeps falling. The city the overseers built keeps standing, for now, for a while, for as long as a thing built on pruning can stand. And somewhere under it, in the bones of the old city they paved, the off-schedule step keeps echoing, and the hive keeps pausing, And the pause keeps being enough. And the pause will keep being enough, long after the last of us is gone. I was 63 years old the night I jumped. That is not a confession. That is a report. File it under further study required. We will be there when you come looking.